As you mentioned, I'm Dianna Gatto. I am the Director of Paid Social at the Snow Agency. I have been with the agency for about 3 years now, and the Snow Agency is a full-service digital marketing agency that focuses mainly in e-commerce and Shopify brands. So I have been a part of the agency for 3 years now, but they have been in existence for longer than that. And over the last 4 or 5 years, they have worked with over 100 different brands and $1 billion in revenue, working in all different kinds of industries, mainly in e-commerce, like I mentioned. Today, I'm going to be talking about 10 tips to boost your paid social performance. Tip number 1 is establishing clear goals. This is something that we go through with a lot of our brands, no matter what stage of business they're in. Specifically, the ones just getting started, they don't really know where to go when they are just starting out on ads. But at the same time, some of the bigger brands are still unclear about this, don't really know where they should be establishing their goals, what they should be based off of. And sometimes brands who have been running ads for a long time still have to come back into this and figure this out at the same time, whether it's adjusting their product costs, maybe these things change over time and they need to switch up what their goals are. Your goals should also change with the seasonality of your brand as well, so have to keep that in mind. But one thing for working with either on the brand side or as an agency, establishing clear goals before you launch your ads is going to be really important. Understanding exactly what your break-even KPIs are so that you can ensure that all of your ads are going to be profitable and you know when is the right time to scale is really important. So your break-even KPI should be based on your product cost, and that should be specific to the channel that you're working on so that you can ensure that your return on ad spend or your CPA is profitable for your brand based on your product cost. But then at the same time, you should be setting a store-level KPI in addition to your channel-specific KPI. For example, an MER goal or a contribution margin goal. At that point, once you've established your KPI and you're at a point where you're hitting your target KPI per channel, then you want to establish a revenue goal. So some brands have specific revenue goals as soon as we start out with them. Some brands have no idea where to go with this, and we help them develop that. But if you're unsure what your goal should be when you're just starting out, a good place to start is month over month or quarter over quarter improvements. Once you've been in business for about a year, you want to be working on year over year comparisons as well. That will help you see the seasonality of your product. Next tip here is naming conventions. So this is something that we go through all the time in the audit process. Every time that we're going through the sales process with the brand, we go through and audit their ad accounts. And this is one thing that we call out almost every single time. Every single brand does naming conventions a little bit differently. Some brands don't use naming conventions at all. Some ad buyers don't use naming conventions at all. And this is something that you absolutely must have in every single one of your campaigns, all of your ad sets, all of your ads. You should be able to see every single thing that's happening in your campaign without ever clicking into it. If you have to look through every single ad and every single ad set to figure out what's going on in your campaigns, you're already losing time. And I know everybody, whether you're on the brand side or the agency side, everybody can relate to the fact that they want some time back in their day. And this is an easy one. You should be able to see your demographic, your location, your budget optimization, your destination, your campaign type, your product focus, your ad type. Everything should be visible just from looking at the name of your product so that you can analyze all of your performance without ever having to click into something. And that should be helpful to you, somebody else on your team. If you have like other managers on your team who are looking into your performance, you don't want them to have to click through every single thing to be able to figure that out as well. And once you have your naming conventions established and everything is in there, then at that point, you can leverage filters inside your ad count. So if you're not using filters, this is definitely something you want to get used to doing, having your ad delivery filtered on all the time, pretty much going through and using the filters of the different names that you have established. So if you want to look at the difference between your video performance versus your image performance, easily flip on those filters on and off for segmenting out your ad names. The same goes for at the campaign level. If you want to look at different performance by product, filtering that out at the campaign level, and you can do those filters at the same exact time as well. One thing for recommending this across the board for many brands, or if you're on the agency side, definitely recommend doing a naming convention builder. This will help you keep your naming conventions consistent across the board to all of your brands, as well as if you're managing multiple ad accounts for the same brand, or if you have multiple marketers working on one brand. So everybody should be using the same naming convention builder. And this is really important when you're leveraging your filters. For example, if you're running a product campaign and you have there's 2 words in that name. One media buyer might put it in there with 1 word with no space, and then another media buyer might put it in there with a space in between. And that will completely throw off all of your filters and all of your results. So having a naming convention builder with drop downs for options rather than people just going through and typing in responses will definitely help you with keeping your filters organized. One important thing about naming conventions is if you don't have the right naming conventions on your ad account, having that bad data is better than having no data, is worse than having no data at all. Sorry. One important thing about this is when you're using those filters, if your naming conventions are not absolutely perfect of exactly what's in that ad account, you're going to be making decisions based off not accurate data. So for example, if you are analyzing performance between two different products and you have ads in that campaign that don't actually represent what is in the naming convention of that campaign, you're going to make a decision to scale that campaign because the performance looks really good. But for example, the ad in there is skewing your data because it's not lined up for the right naming convention. So you have to make sure that every single person running your ad account is following the naming conventions to a T. And if you have them incorrect, it's worse than not having them at all. Next tip on here is account consolidation. This is something that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about recently, as this has been coming from Meta for a while now, but this is very important when it comes to combining your campaigns and ad sets, and especially with your budgets. So this is another thing that we see a lot of times when we're going through ad account audits for other brands. This comes up a lot just because a lot of people are trying to run a bunch of different tests at one time. Maybe they're still running low budgets and they're trying to spread out that budget across so many different ad sets and so many different ads at the same time. And this is really going to hurt your performance. So if you have campaigns that are going towards the same product, or if you have ad sets that are duplicated for different audiences, you want to combine those as much as you possibly can. Combine the ads that you have in those audiences and increase the budgets that you have. If you have low budgets that are consistently hitting learning limits, that's going to hurt your performance. Once you get past that 50 conversions a week to exit the learning phase, your performance is going to increase. The algorithm is going to do better by you. You're going to have lower CPMs. So across the board, it's going to help your performance. You want to make sure that your budgets are high enough to support actually exiting the learning phase, which you can figure out that number for what that budget needs to be by analyzing your target CPA. So you can run that formula to figure out exactly what your ad set budget needs to be. And if you can't support that, if your budget is not high enough to be able to get out of the learning phase, think about lowering your optimization event if you need to. One thing about this is it's not always possible to do exactly one campaign per product. It's completely understandable to have different campaigns depending on what you're testing at a time. But when there is overlap that can be combined, that's what you want to combine. So minimize the number of campaigns as much as you possibly can. You do want to have like one creative testing campaign, one Advantage Plus shopping campaign, one retargeting campaign. Duplicate those by product depending on what you're running. But when you can combine them, definitely combine them. It'll help your budgets as well as your algorithm. Next tip in here is creative diversity. This is another one that has come up a lot, especially since iOS 14. Everybody on here, I'm sure, knows that creative is so important to any paid social campaign. Everything that we do at our agency is focused around our creative testing process, and you need to have creatives in there on a weekly basis, on a regular basis. All the time, you should be testing creatives. You don't want to get stuck just relying on one creative. You will have a creative that might hit and it might work for a really long time, but if you're relying on that, the creative fatigue will eventually hit that ad. And at that point, you need to have other assets in your ad account that you can then shift to and focus on those as well. So you don't want to just rely on one ad the entire time that you're running your ad account. You will end up getting hurt by that. When that one does fall off, you need to have other assets that you can rely on. And a big part of creative diversity is the actual formats and the content that you're putting into those campaigns and ads as well. So for example, with Advantage Plus shopping, we all know that the recent thing has been to have at least 10 ads in all of those campaigns. And inside of those 10 ads, you want to make sure that you're leveraging all of the different ad formats and all of different types of content within those 10 ads. So you don't want to have just all UGC videos and all UGC images. You want to make sure that you're mixing in product photography, lifestyle videos, all the different kinds of content that you can imagine, putting all of those into there and having as many formats and as many types of content that you can. This is really important as your consumers go down the funnel when you're hitting them from your Advantage Plus shopping campaign into your retargeting campaigns. You want to make sure that they're seeing different content as they go down, which will help them really connect with your brand and see different formats, and they'll really remember your brand at that point. You don't want them to see the same exact ad over and over again, for the same reason why we try to limit frequency on campaigns. So for example, some of the ad formats that you want to make sure that you're leveraging are your images, videos, carousels, collections, and Advantage Plus catalog ads. You want to make sure that you have a good mix of all of those throughout your campaigns. And specifically for multi-SKU stores, especially in the fashion and apparel industry, need to make sure you're using Advantage Plus catalog ads. For those of you who are familiar with it, those used to be called dynamic ads. So that's really important for multi-SKU stores, and those do perform incredibly well for those brands. One other thing about the creative diversity is you want to make sure you have a good mix of creatives within your ad account, which also goes with a mix of people who are featured in those creatives. So you want to make sure that the creative that you're running is aligned to the target demographic, but then you want to make sure that you have a handful of creators inside of that content as well. You don't want to have 20 different ads with the same person featured in it every single time. And then last one on the creative topic is that you want your UGC content to be authentic and relatable. This is how the people are really going to relate to your brand. Make sure that they're talking about pain points that really hit home to your target demographic. You want them to be able to relate to it within the first 10 seconds to ensure that they're going to watch the entire thing. Tip number 5 is understanding your brand seasonality. So this one is really important. I did hint at this in the first tip as well, but seasonality is completely normal and should be expected for your brand. For example, a perfect example of this is anything in like the wellness and fitness space in the beginning of the year. That is always a thing for January and February for those brands to kick up in performance, as well as a clothing brand for back to school time. The performance will kick up then as well. So understanding your brand seasonality and knowing how to adjust your KPIs based on that seasonality is really important. So when you know that your brand's performance is going to pick up, you want to adjust your KPIs to like represent that. So for example, you don't want to just always go after month over month improvement on your KPIs. If you know that your performance is going to pick up in January, you want to make sure that your revenue goal represents that as well. And you have something that's really going to reflect that so that you can not limit yourself in terms of what you're going after for that month. And then the same goes the other way around. There are going to be low times. We all know that. So make sure you adjust your KPIs for those times as well. Don't try to stretch your budget just to hit a revenue goal if it's not going to make sense with the ROAS or the CPA that you're getting. You don't want to waste your money. You want to understand the seasonality of your product and be able to adjust your goals for that. One thing about the seasonality of products that I do see a lot of times with brands that we've worked with in the past, a lot of times brands don't really understand the seasonality of their product and they make drastic changes to their strategy or their budgets, which then just hurt their performance more because they don't realize why those changes are happening. So for example, if you're looking at month over month performance, and we just had Labor Day sales for a ton of brands. Next month, when you're looking at the first weekend of the month, when you're looking at month over month performance, it would be expected that your performance is going to be down. You don't want to go into your ad account and only be looking at those numbers and see performance being down 30% month over month and going in and drastically cutting your budgets, drastically cutting everything that you have in there. You have to understand what was going on at that time. For example, if you were running like a heavy subscription discount at that time versus what you're running now, you have to be able to make those connections between what you were doing at those times to not make drastic changes to your strategy and impulsive decisions to your budgets. So understanding that is really important. And as you get into that year 2 of your brand, you'll be able to start seeing those year over year trends as well. Of course, at that time, you want to see your revenue going up, but you'll still be able to see the fluctuations between up and down at that time. Last point here on adjusting this is, like I mentioned from the first slide of adjusting your KPIs, this is really important in terms of what you have going on, what sales you're running. You want to make sure that your KPIs are aligned to the offers that you're running. So like I mentioned with your brand, if you're expecting January to be a good brand, you want to adjust your revenue to a good month. You want to adjust your revenue targets to reflect that. Next tip here is for embracing new technology. So one thing that I just want to put out there for this slide is really just being okay with letting go of your old strategies. We all know that like frameworks are very helpful. We operate our entire agency off of frameworks of things that we learn from other brands, but you can't be stuck in your ways because that will come back to haunt you in the long run. So you need to be okay with pivoting from the old strategies. What you know used to work isn't always going to work, and you have to be okay with letting that go and trying out new things. The things that happen with tracking in iOS 14 is the perfect example of this. A lot of people were hesitant on trying new tracking technologies when this happened. And for about 6 months, it was a lot of craziness going on in terms of what are we supposed to be doing here? What data can we trust? What data can't we trust? So if you haven't installed something else for a tracking solution outside of the Meta Shopify Conversions API, you are definitely missing out. There are so many different solutions out there that can help you solve this problem. One of them being third-party conversions API solutions like Popsicle, Elevar, EdgeTag. Another being a third-party pixel solution like Northbeam or Triple Whale. There are so many options out there. You just have to look at them, figure out which one is best for your brand, It could be a combination of the two as well, but there are so many things out there that the tracking issue should not be an issue anymore for anybody. There are so many solutions, and the Meta Shopify Conversions API is not the perfect solution. You still will end up with that data being lost. Shopify will send that information back to Meta, but it really isn't using all of that information. If someone opts out of tracking, that data is still lost because Meta is then not able to use that. For example, with a third-party conversions API solution, you're sending back your own data. So even if somebody did opt out for the tracking, we're then able to use that. So if you're only using the Meta Conversions API option, I do recommend that you definitely look for something else as well to go alongside with that. Another point being Advantage Plus shopping for Meta and then smart performance campaigns on TikTok. If this is something that you're not doing, you definitely want to put this into your strategy. The performance of these campaigns over the last 9 months has just been continuing to improve, and so many brands are leveraging this for a majority of their budget at this point. So be okay with trusting the algorithm and letting the algorithm do the work on these campaigns. You want to put the focus into what creatives you're putting into these campaigns and let the algorithm do the work with the targeting and everything else. So definitely recommend adding those in if you haven't done that already. And another thing on that topic is just anything with like the Advantage Plus name on Meta has increased performance. So if you're not using Advantage Plus placements, Advantage Plus catalog ads, things like that, definitely recommend testing those. Another technology piece would be Shopify audiences. So not sure if everybody's familiar with this. You can leverage Shopify audiences if you are located in the US, if you are on Shopify Plus, and if you use Shopify payments. I highly recommend that you test out Shopify audiences. They just released Shopify Audiences 2.0 a few months ago, and we had really incredible results testing that out across a lot of our brands. They will export custom audiences into your ad account, directly syncing the data over every week, and you will then have new target audiences for your prospecting campaigns. Another tech thing that has become out recently that goes along with shops, which TikTok Shop and Facebook and Instagram Shop have been a hot topic over the last year, is website and shop conversion locations. So this is the same as having like sending traffic to your website and shop, but it will do the work for you. So you're selecting this option as the conversion location, and then Meta is doing the work to figure out whether they should send somebody to the shop or whether they should send them to the website. And you don't need to do anything. You just put in both options and they will guide them to the location that they think is going to be best for the conversion. Next one is TikTok shops. If you are on TikTok and if you are somebody who leverages lives or UGCs, definitely need to get onto that. It has been incredible for performance for a lot of our brands. It is still very new, so they're still figuring out, but I recommend that you test that as well. Another one being partnership ads. If you're somebody who has leveraged whitelisting in the past, partnership ads are something that you need to be testing out. This is going to be the new version of whitelisting in the future, where you're partnering with the creatives and running the ads from your brand and from the creators at the same exact time. So a little bit different than the previous whitelisting, but this is going to be the new whitelisting. We've tested this on a handful of brands, also have seen significant improvements on performance testing this versus our regular ads or our regular whitelisting ads. And then the last one on the tech side that I will call out is just leveraging AI tools. There's a ton of different AI tools out there now, and if you're not using them in your strategies, you definitely want to be, whether it's using ChatGPT for figuring out ad copy and doing new creative ideas and just sparking new ideas for your ad buyers. You don't want to rely on the AI tools. They are definitely not perfect, and you can't copy and paste things over from one thing to another. So don't let it do your job. But if you're not using it to spark ideas, you're definitely going to miss out on that. So if you're not on that yet, you definitely want to get on it. Tip number 7 is for continuous testing. So one main call out here really is just that your testing process should never end. Like I mentioned, we do a lot of creative testing with our brands, but there are a ton of different things that you can be testing, and the testing of these things should really never end. Whether it's testing new products, new angles, new creatives, campaign setups, targeting options, there are countless things that you can be testing, and you need to make sure that this creative testing process is a part of every single one of your brands. As you're identifying winners, you want to iterate on them. If you have a good creative, switch out the hook, switch out the text overlay, add a banner to it, switch up the destination. There are so many different things that you can do, change small aspects of it and improve the performance on that and find additional scalable assets. Once you have winning creatives, you should be using the insights from that creative to develop all of your new raw content. That process should also never end. When you have a winner, you should go back to that influencer who created that ad for you and ask them to develop more. Get another creator to make something that's very similar with the same exact angle and the same exact hook. So there's so many different things that you can do using that winning creative, and developing new content is like an endless opportunity that you have for your brands. Next one here is to not rely on the success of one campaign or ad. Like I mentioned earlier, creative fatigue will eventually hit in, and you want to make sure that you have plenty of different things to pivot to at the time that it does. Last note on creative testing is that you don't want to stop testing, but if you test in an unorganized way, it will then just not be worth it in the long run. So you want to make sure you're doing structured A/B tests when you're switching up an element of an ad or a campaign, anything like that. You want to make sure you're only changing one thing. If you're changing 3 things at a time and then you try to analyze the performance in the end, you're not going to have any idea what actually changed that performance. So you want to make sure that you're very specific about what you're testing, only change out one variable at a time so that when you finish that test, you can conclude it and have a clear conclusion that you can apply to the rest of your campaigns. So along with that, with structured A/B tests also goes into an organized testing outline. Don't test 20 different things in your ad account at a time. If you then see a spike in your Shopify revenue, you're going to have no way to figure out what actually drove that spike, which just makes the test not worth it in the long run. So make sure you have a clear outline of what you're testing and when, and you're logging when you're making those changes so that you can really figure out what drove that success. Tip number 8 is understanding your customer. So like I mentioned, this goes perfectly with the last presentation about understanding your customer and why they are buying your product. One thing that I run into with brands when we're first getting started is I realize that the brands sometimes are very specific about who their customer is, and we have learned many times over again that they don't always know exactly who their customer is. So don't be afraid to pivot from who you thought your customer was. You might have a very good idea of it, but you might be missing out on a whole segment that you don't even know existed. So for example, yesterday I was talking to a brand where they did a post-purchase survey and they realized that 30% of their consumers were using their product for something that they never even thought of. So that is a huge chunk of people that they didn't even realize that that use case for their product existed. So that is something that you don't want to cut out of your strategy. Make sure you really understand who your consumer is and don't be afraid to test new consumers as well. Don't be locked into that persona that you think is your customer because you might not always be right. Leverage a post-purchase survey if you are not already. Figure out who your customer is, why they're purchasing from you. There are so many different things that you can do with a post-purchase survey. I hope many of you are attending the seminar later with No Commerce. Definitely recommend installing this to your brand. It is so easy, and the insights that you will get from it go in a million different directions that will give you so much to analyze. Last thing on this point is analyzing your customer reviews and being able to take those insights to figure out your ad angles and who you want to target. So in addition to the post-purchase survey, you can also go through all of your customer reviews, read through your reviews, read through competitors' reviews, figure out what people are saying, think about what they're saying, why they're saying it, to figure out what are the most important things to your customer. What are the pain points that people keep talking about? What are the best USPs that people keep talking about? Why did they buy your product? Figure out what people are saying over and over again and use that to plan out your future ads. Tip 9 is setting appropriate product offers. So in the theme of Black Friday, this is going to be very important. One thing that we have to do with a lot of our brands when we're just getting started is help them figure out a promotional calendar. You want to think about your promotions a bit in advance. Don't be planning them out the week of. Don't be trying to publish ads the day that your campaigns are going to go live. You will run into issues with like rejections and not getting your ads through approval. If you're trying to publish ads the day of Black Friday, it will take 6 hours for them to go through review. So you definitely want to make sure you have your promotional calendar planned out in advance, and you want to test different offers over time to determine which one is going to be the best for you. One thing that I see with a lot of brands is they just think that the one with the highest take rate is always the best offer, but that might not be true. If you're just cutting into your product margins too much, even though the take rate is there, it might not be the most profitable. So test a bunch of different options and evaluate those before you figure out which one is going to be the one that sticks. You also want to leverage evergreen offers as well as different campaign promotions. So for example, having an offer for your email subscriptions and having a different one for your abandoned cart audiences in your Facebook campaigns. So have a few small evergreen offers that you can leverage all the time in addition to the bigger promotional ones that you're going to run. One important thing with this is make sure you're adjusting your KPIs during sale periods. Your KPI is going to change during sale times because you're offering your product at a lower price. So you don't want to just scale based on your original KPI and then realize that it wasn't profitable for you in the long run. So make sure every time that you're prepping for a promotion based on your promotional calendar, you outline what KPI you're going to be working on for that sale. And then the last point on the product offers is if you are a subscription company, one of the biggest mistakes that we see from a lot of brands is just that their subscription offer is not good enough. This is something that you also want to test over time. Test different options, see what is the best take rate, get more people onto your subscription. And tip number 10 is that no two brands are the same. So like I mentioned, we work off of a lot of frameworks, and that is how we have scaled our agency and a lot of our brands. So you know what works, but again, don't be stuck in your ways. Not every brand is the same. One strategy that works for one brand is not always going to work for another. Every pixel is different. Your CPMs are always going to be different. Every target audience is different, and you have to be able to understand that. So if it works, it doesn't always work. So one thing about this is if something is working, you can continue to scale it, use it on other accounts, but then you have to know the flip side of that as well. If something isn't working, cut it and move on. Don't try to beat that into the ground and do it over and over and over again. So strategies can be transferred across accounts and industries, but your success is not guaranteed. So be open-minded and continue to test over time.